My mic on? Yep. Thank you, Jason. I'm Charlie Gorecki. I'm the CEO at the Energy and Environmental Research Center. The EERC, I think probably most of you know who we are, but we're part of the University of North Dakota, a non-teaching branch, with a vision to lead the world in developing solutions to energy and environmental challenges, which is a huge vision. And how we do that is really stood up by three parts. And first, that's our people. Many of them are here in the audience with you. We have about 285 employees, all focused on that mission. It's our partnerships. It's those partnerships with all of you here, industry, whether it's power producers, service providers, miners, and the whole gamut of industry, but also the state and federal government. It's through those partnerships that we really drive towards that mission. And then it's our priorities. And when I think about the EERC today, of those priorities to accomplish that big vision is, how do we provide clean, reliable, affordable energy to a growing global population that really wants more and more power? And then when we dig down into those priorities, it first and foremost today probably is carbon management being one of those enormous priorities. It's what's being demanded by the consumers of the power, to have carbon managed power, but also oil and gas, alternative fuels, renewable energy, energy-water nexus, emissions control. We have a great set of resources in North Dakota. We have 800 years of lignite coal. We are the third largest producer of oil and gas in the United States. We are one of the top 10 producers of wind power. We have an all of the above energy mix. And any one of these things by themselves can't solve our solutions, even in North Dakota, but let alone the globe. So it's a priority for us to try to figure out and solve those challenges with each of those different energy types. We have in North Dakota this incredible resource base. You've probably heard the governor say before, we have the geologic jackpot. That's that oil and gas, that's the lignite coal that we have. But we export 5 to 6 times as much energy as we consume in North Dakota. So we have to really be concerned about those external pressures like carbon management and how that satisfying those things can really drive our economy here. So regardless of what you think about carbon management, our neighbors, our consumers of power are demanding that. And we have the opportunity in North Dakota to meet that need while simultaneously producing and providing clean, reliable power. I don't know, on the screen behind me, you'll see a map. This is western part of North Dakota, where that geologic jackpot really resides. You see that gray area on the screen? That is our oil and gas fields. Predominantly that big continuous gray area is the Basin production area, today producing about 1.2 million barrels. You'll also see those kind of goldish orange fields. Those are conventional oil and gas fields that are ready for CO2 for enhanced oil recovery. And you'll see the blue stars, which indicate carbon capture and storage projects that are happening today safely and effectively in North Dakota, some of which have been going on for more than 20 years, including carbon capture and storage at Dakota Gasification, with a pipeline that's carried more than 40 million tons of carbon dioxide safely through North Dakota, through the oil patch, up into Canada. And today we also have dedicated storage going on, and you'll hear about it from Todd in a minute, I'm sure, from Dakota Gas near the plant, as well as a couple of other CCS projects. North Dakota leads the way with respect to environmental stewardship, leads the way with respect to policy, and we are in a perfect opportunity to get CCS done and provide that clean, reliable, affordable energy. I could probably go on and on, but I figured that would set the stage for what we are trying to do is work with these partners to try to see that vision happen.
Thank you. Stacy?
Hi, my name is Stacy Tschider. I'm the CEO of Rainbow Energy Center here in Bismarck, North Dakota. And when I started thinking about the last 50 years and the celebration that we had last night and look at all the things that have been done up to this date, what really gets me excited is the next 50 years. How can we take these wonderful assets that we have here in North Dakota and excel going forward? So when I look at Rainbow Energy Center, what we're doing at Coal Creek Station, and look at, these are the pioneers, these are the people that are getting things done in the state, and I say to myself, do anybody in this room think we need fossil fuels going forward? Yeah, we do. We need not only to have fossil fuels, we need to run towards fossil fuels, and we need to double our usage. So how do we enhance? How do we enhance our existing assets of fossil fuels? And North Dakota will lead. There's no question in my life, no question that they will lead. Having primacy, having the infrastructure. I have to share everybody in here. We go through about 8.5 million tons of CO2 a year. And you're like, oh my gosh, that's terrible. No, that CO2 is a value. That is a commodity. We will be using that in the future. And is it going to be easy? It isn't. But when I look at when we started purchasing decided to purchase Coal Creek Station 2 years ago, and I've said this many times, it wasn't to basically put a Band-Aid on Coal Creek. And there's so much attack that is happening across our country through the EPA and everything else. It was like, how can we enhance? How can we build off what GRE was doing there as an energy park? And so when you look at some of the historical CO2 management that they were doing, and we continue to do, one of them is the fly ash business. You know, we basically take fly ash to the market about 500,000 tons a year, and we're gonna, in the near future, go that to about 900,000 tons. And so when you look at it on a one-for-one as far as CO2 replacement is, you know, that has to be talked about. And also the technology we have at Coal Creek is the dry fining, where we take that coal, we dry it, and increase the BTU, ultimately burning less coal. So, you know, we've had 2 years of, I call a holiday, but I couldn't be more proud of what's happening at Coal Creek Station. Things are happening, and they're happening quickly. We have a new leader at the helm there, Ethan Bogney over here. I couldn't be more proud of him for what he's doing there. And it's having the mindset, I'm good today, but I'm better tomorrow. There's no such thing as neutral at all. And you have to always be moving forward. Now, do you hit roadblocks? Do you hit battles? Do you hit all those things? Yes. But when I think about carbon management and the enhancement of fossil fuels, I want people to start taking the mindset, is this a commodity or is this a waste? Because there's a lot of people out there look at it as a waste. I look at it as a value. I'm thankful that Coal Creek Station has 8.5 million tons of CO2. Now, can we show the value today? No, but in the future, and Jason, when you're walking through the history, the evolution in 50 years, and as they say, what does it look like for the coal plants in the future? Are we as North Dakotans going to run towards this? Are we going to solve this? We are. Because in North Dakota, we will we see the problem and we'll figure things out. But you have to have, from the top down, you got to have an administration. And we have that in North Dakota. It's not easy. But we basically have to continue to drive to basically preserve these wonderful assets. When I think of 800 years worth of fuel, I'll just share a little quick thing here on the fuel side of it. I'm always a little harsh on wind, solar, meaning that I'm harsh in the sense I always call it what it is. It's an intermittent resource. Don't call it a baseload unit, ever, because it's not, right? It's very important. But I'm also getting a little hard on natural gas. And I'm a natural gas producer, and I love natural gas, and I love oil. But the reality of it is getting those molecules to the burner tip aren't as easy as they once were. So you have heating load in our country. And now you're basically transitioning to a significant amount of what base load generation for natural gas, but they don't have fuel security. They think they have fuel security. That's the problem. They don't have it. If you don't have firm transport on pipelines, you're no different than an intermittent resource. So our country is starting to see this. Base load generation is vital. Coal is vital for humanity. And so when I start thinking through in the load growth that I'm seeing, it's starting to come. Where any of these plants, we cannot decommission one more plant. We need to be building. We need to be building. We have a strong appetite for energy in our country. We want to lead in our country. We're going to lead in our country because we sure don't want Putin holding our data. We sure don't want China managing our data. We need to manage that data in the state of North Dakota. Virginia, 70% of our internet is flowing through Virginia. If I know that, Putin knows that. This week we had a little blip in the screen where Verizon went down. People get unrest when they don't have data. We have to truly understand where is that data coming from, how important it is. So when I look at overall what's happening in North Dakota with this carbon management, carbon capture, we have to continue to step forward. We need to get leaders in our state to understand that this is an opportunity. This is not a penalty. And I'm so grateful to be here today and to kind of share. And I anticipate a great conversation up here. So thanks, Jace.
Thank you. Moving on to Mac.
Thank you. For those of you who might not know me, I'm McLennan. I'm the CEO at Minnkota Power. It was interesting as Jason was going through his 50 years. So here in about 2 months will be my 30th year in the electric utility industry, and it's all primarily been working in precisely this space. So I harken back to some of those things that Jason was going through. And 30 years ago, I was working on cap and trade programs for CO2. At one point, I was a congressional staff member working on this. At one point, I lived in D.C. trying to figure out what does a federal mindset look like around CO2 more than 30 years ago. And so you fast forward to where we are today, which is a continued conversation about what does a carbon managed world look like. And I think over time what you'll see is there's going to be a convergence between what I call reliability and a carbon managed world, right? It doesn't feel like it today because it feels a lot like the pathway, if you will, is more towards sustainability, less towards reliability. But I mean, I think as others have indicated, you're beginning to see that change as people look at opportunities. So, Stace referred to it, and clearly the hottest topic right now when you think about it is what do you do with data and AI and all of the things that can come to the table as it relates to the opportunity for technology advancement. The other thing that I look at as it relates to is none of that is going to happen unless, and I think Stacy did a good job of describing the capacity and ability for us to maintain a diverse set of fuel supply, right? There is, one of the things that when we talk about what scares you the most, and one for me is that we get myopic. And by that, I mean, if you think about what people are talking about beyond North Dakota, right? I think North Dakota, we are blessed with the individuals on this stage and all of you in the room and a policy environment that embraces the idea that you'll have multiple opportunities. So, as Charlie described it before, and it doesn't always mesh well, I get that, but you have a conversation going on now, potentially the legislature in 2025 is going to look at what might nuclear look like in the state of North Dakota. We clearly, and I'll come back to what do we do with the coal resources here, we have plenty of opportunities in a renewable space as well, oil and gas. But when I talk about being myopic is that outside of those places who are willing to have those conversations about preservation, and I think to Stacy's point, what's the advancement of coal? How do you preserve all of those? And the reason you get myopic, I think, is that because people can't see beyond, as Jason did, they can't see beyond year 3 or year 4 or year 5. And you think about it globally. You have a global population that's growing. They're all going to continue to want the same kinds of things we have today. And then there's other parts of the world. There's still energy poverty in this world today that ultimately we're going to find ways to cure through the use of this. But it all is going to exist in an ever, and I'll call it squeezing, world around what do you do with greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere, right? And the reason I say that is you can't pick up an article anywhere in the world today around energy or the environment that doesn't have a focus on what are the impacts of a changing climate, right? And everybody in this room, and I'd be willing to bet you have every spectrum of opinion represented in this room as well as it relates to how great is the impact of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. One level being, I describe it as CO2 is good for you and that we ought to produce more of it and it's helpful to the other side of the world potentially where we need to figure out how to get it out the atmosphere. And so as you drive toward a carbon managed world and you get out of the idea of we're all going to put the economy on gas, which, because I share with Stacy, if one of my single greatest fears is that people believe that we can put the entire economy of not only the U.S., but the world on a handful of resources, whether that's nuclear, whether that's gas, whether that's, right? We've been successful, both as a country and a world, because we have had a diverse set of supply, right? And we have intermittent resources, which can play a role. I'm grateful, I mean, I say this a little bit jokingly, I'm grateful that the wind blew the last few days because we had 3 of our coal units, none of which have operated. I walked out of my office one day, we had 3 megawatts of generation and 658 megawatts worth of load on our system because the wind wasn't blowing, and we were buying all that then in the marketplace. And you can do that when the market's $30 a megawatt hour. You can't do that when it's $3,500 an hour. You get the consequences that a lot of people felt in Texas in a really short time frame in 2021. And so as we move towards, whether we like it or not, whether we believe in it or not, we are going to move towards a carbon managed world. And so you think about the work being done here in North Dakota around trying to preserve all of the options in that carbon managed world. And then the other thing you have to get to, and I think this is why it was interesting as Jason talked about, what does it look like 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, and 50 years from now, is you have to have a mindset that allows you to have a time horizon that goes out 20 years, right? And as we come back, I know Jason's going to ask some questions about what do we see, some of the, what I'll call right now, what are some of the current challenges. And so I'll save those comments until he asks the question, but I know it's coming. But if you think about the work and what Stacy just described in terms of creating energy complexes and that Charlie described in terms of taking these assets and making them better products and more products and multiple use products. So if you just take what's been commented on this morning already, you have the capacity with lignite coal to pull critical minerals, right, which we are 90% reliant on China in the world today. You have the capacity to make building materials. You have, once it's combusted, and Stacy's 900,000 tons of fly ash going to the marketplace, you have the capacity to produce energy. You have a stream, to your point, a marketable stream called CO2, which Charlie and a lot of other people in the world are beginning to figure out may serve as one of the best mediums we have to drive more oil out of the ground with less production or less drilling of holes and more production, I should say, balanced against those people who are pressing back to say, I don't want oil derricks off the coast of Florida, and I don't want them in the Gulf, and I don't want them in the Arctic. And the answer is you don't have to have them. We don't even have to drill any more holes for the most part if we're successful in the path that we're headed down to produce a significant amount of additional fuel with the resources we have today, if we treat it as a commodity and an opportunity rather than a waste stream. And so, as I sit here today, one of the really big challenges I think that we'll talk about in front of us is the ability to have people have open minds about what the world looks like a decade and 2 decades from now as they get focused on what happens in the next 3 months and fundamentally how do we solve everything immediately, right? That mindset is the mindset we're on today, I would call from a policy perspective, and no disrespect to all of you in the room who are policymakers, but you guys operate on terms that are 2 and 4 and 6 years. We build assets that are 30 and 40 and 50 years old. I have transmission poles today that are 75 years old, right? That's damn near 2 times my age. And so as we build those kinds of assets in a 30-second society, that in my mind is what drives us towards the train wreck we're headed toward. And so we got to back up from that and recognize that we can't build an energy sector on 2 and 4 and 6 and 8 year policies, right? And so that to me is one of the challenges that we have to get through, is that people are going to have patience, they're going to have longer vision, they're going to have the capacity to be able to see what the value is. I just had this conversation at the end of last week with my board as we talk about the next set of decisions, and I'll talk about Project Tundra when we do the Q&A here in terms of where we are and what's happening momentarily, but part of the conversation as you think about that dialogue with our board is around how do you prepare for the next 30 and 40 and 50 years and know that it's going to be different. And I made a comment earlier this morning. I was having a conversation a little bit about there are differences of opinion about the speed at which there's a carbon managed world. And what I argued to my staff and to our board already is we already in this room, every single one of us live in a carbon managed world. And everyone looks at me and like I've lost my mind. Stacy sells his electricity to Minnesota. I sell my electricity to Minnesota. Todd sells his electricity to Minnesota. And short of the portion of electricity generated at a coyote for kind of Otter Tail sells to Minnesota, right? So MDU sells to North Dakota, sells to Montana, sells to other places besides Minnesota. So if you are a MDU individual selling North Dakota, you maybe not live in the same carbon managed world, but every single one of us have an obligation by 2040 for every molecule to have it be carbon free to the state of Minnesota, which by the way, they don't know how to define carbon free yet over there. They're debating that today, but nonetheless, that is a constraint. Half of the load that we serve for electricity in today's environment goes to a place that by 2040 is going to be carbon free. That is already a carbon managed world, you guys. You can like it or not like it. We can think we can change the politics in Minnesota. Certainly a difficult challenge as it relates to it, but we all live in a carbon managed world. And so I think as we think about the work Charlie's doing and that everybody else on this stage and in this state are doing is how do we take advantage of that, not how do we figure out how not to put the resources in necessary to make that better and a diversified fuel supply as we go forward.
Thank you, Mac. Todd?
Thank you. I'm Todd Brickhouse. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Basin Electric. And I can make a very compelling case that Basin Electric is the leading CO2 sequestration utility in the world. I say that proudly. I am bragging, but I'm humble about it because I've only been part of Basin for just over 2 years. So there are a lot of my colleagues and teammates in this room that have made it happen. And it started happening about a quarter century ago. In the late 1990s, our largest subsidiary, Dakota Gasification, thought it makes sense to build a pipeline up to Canada to use CO2 for enhanced oil recovery. And that got done, pipeline got done in right around 2000. And since then, as Charlie referenced, we have sequestered about 45 million tons of CO2 through enhanced oil recovery. Then the story doesn't end there. We have down in Wyoming the integrated test center at our Dry Fork station where over $100 million have been invested in CO2 sequestration and research. Now, a lot of that has come from grants and other parties. We'll take credit for it, though, since we let it be done at our facility and really our newest facility and newest coal facility and one of the newest coal units and one of the last coal units built in the United States. And then you come to just in the past year, February 9th was a huge day for us at Basin. Again, DGC began sequestering carbon on site or adjacent to the site at North American Coal land and Basin land and some adjacent landowners' land. And then in August of this year, in just 6 months, we sequestered our millionth ton of CO2. So it is a incredibly proud heritage of CO2 sequestration and innovation that Basin has. And something that we should all be proud of, whether you are affiliated with Basin or not, is that this can only or could only be accomplished in North Dakota. As North Dakotans, we should be enormously proud of this. And I can tell you that definitively. I started in the utility industry. It'll be 25 years in August of 2025. And I worked at a utility that served Virginia, Maryland, and Delaware. And I joined the utility to help them finance 3 combustion turbine projects, 2 in Virginia, 1 right along Maryland and Delaware. And it was like pulling teeth to get those projects done. And they were meaningful to the tax base in the localities. Contrast that with Basin's Pioneer Phase 4. We kicked off that project, got our board approval 2 months after I got to Basin. I think it was August or September of 2022. We will finish that project, God willing, with some good luck, in August of next year. So that's a 3-year from board approval to completion. You can't do that in almost any other state. We all work together in North Dakota. It's a can-do attitude, and it's just remarkable. And Forbes magazine puts out this ranking of best states to do business in, and North Dakota's never been in the #1 place. Actually, Virginia, where I'm from, has been in that #1 spot a number of times, and I just don't understand how that's the case, because North Dakota is, I can tell you almost definitively, maybe Texas is close, South Dakota, some others, Wyoming might be close, but to do what we do, there is no better state than North Dakota to do it in. The permitting's great, the resources we have are great, and everyone from the academics to the politicians to the regulators to we're not competitors, but we're peers. We all work together for the success, and it's a remarkable place to do business. And some of you may not know that Basin, by our retail geographic footprint, is actually the largest electric utility in the country. We cover 500,000 square miles. That is 12% of the land of the free and the home of the brave. It's 9 states, so we see how it is to do business in a number of other states, and it's in all of those states, it is tough to beat North Dakota. So it's a great place to do business, and we look forward to innovating in the future with respect to future CO2 sequestration opportunities.
Thank you for those introductory remarks. I'm going to begin with some questions, and what we'll do for questions is I'll just rotate who gets the first question. So this first question will start with Stacy, and it deals with the opportunities or justifications drivers for carbon capture, utilization, and storage in North Dakota. So what do you think those justification drivers are? Where does your company fit into that mix, and how does that play into affordable, reliable baseload electricity or other considerations that might be driving your justification?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we produce about 8.5 million tons of CO2, and it really the competitive advantage we see at Coal Creek Station is we have space, also about 60,000 acres of pore space, and of which there's a multiple formation for that storage, for sort of sequestering that CO2. One of the things that we think is really important as being a base load unit is our whole goal from day one is to put Coal Creek at the top and never shut it off. So we have predictability, we have certainty of what our needs are from the coal side and from the power side, from the steam that we supply Blue Flint. And I'll just mention to you guys that aren't aware of this, Blue Flint has been sequestering CO2 right at our site since November of last year. And so when Todd mentions they're the leaders, they are, and they're the pioneers. And I had the opportunity, Todd, to come up to your site a few weeks ago, and truly, the pioneers are those that are at your site right now doing it in the 6 wells. And so when I go outside this state, and people say, this whole carbon capture is silliness, it can't be done. They can't store it. It's gonna basically cause issues. That's all gobbledygook. It's unbelievable. I just say to them, I said, here's what we have in North Dakota. These are the people in North Dakota that are actually getting it done. And to me, I'm so proud, as we all are on the stage, of where North Dakota can continue to lead in this. But this didn't start last week. I mean, over 20-some years, and most people out there don't even realize it. And so when we look at Coal Creek Station and the advantage that we have there is ultimately being able to store at the site is very important, very key, to make sure you have that long-term storage capacity. But the green light truly is this EOR. And Mac had touched on this. We're basically producing the 1.2 million barrels of oil, but for those that aren't aware of it, North Dakota's budget is about 52 to 54% oil. Is it important for North Dakota? Yes, it is. Do we need to preserve that? Yes, we do. How about let's enhance it? Let's basically get more of that oil out of that ground. So we have interest in about 6,000 oil and gas wells in the Bakken area. And we're pulling about 18 to 22% of that oil from the rock. How can we get that to 60%? So when Mac's talking about not having to drill, it's how do we stimulate that? How do we get that oil? And for so many years that we were always drilling conventional vertical wells, and we'd go by the Bakken, we'd get the shows, but it wasn't commercial. So everything that we've seen out in the oil patch has been a technology play. The ability to go down and go horizontal and multi-stage frac. That's pretty exciting. So when I think of technology as a whole, that will be driving our industry also, that we need to continue to leverage that. And so when I look at what we're doing up there, a lot of work is being done, none of which is easy, is really making sure we have the community understanding why we're doing what we're doing and why it's important for the communities, why it's important for the state, why it's important for the employees, all the above. So we want to be extremely transparent on what we're doing and why we're doing it. And that's a question I always ask my employees, why are we doing what we're doing? And get their input and really kind of look at that. Is this important? It is important. Because like I said earlier, if you don't go ahead and move forward, you're going backwards. And I've said this a lot lately, and many of you in this room are probably closer to my age. And everybody remember Kmart? Sears? I mean, I look at those. What did they do? What did they do wrong? Were they willing to change? Were they willing to adapt? Were they willing to innovate? How did they just lose all that market share? I will tell you, at Coal Creek Station and at Rainbow, we will not turn into Kmart. We are going to continue to evolve. And so when Mac is talking about these horizons, 10, 15, 20 years, that's what we look at. You have to look at that. And I'm very concerned, and we'll see here on the election coming up, is that it's tough to run a business based on the policies of who's going to be president. I sure can't run a business based on lawsuits, right? I mean, think about that. Do I win a lawsuit? Okay, I got a business. If I lose a lawsuit, I don't have a business. So we really need to work and try to bring people together. And right now in our country, we have massive divide. I think 80% of the people are on the same page, but we got the wild left and the wild right. And so my goal always is making sure we're putting our best foot forward and really trying to enhance the values and the multiple revenue streams that we have at Coal Creek Station. I tell people that we're a manufacturing plant. What do we manufacture? Manufacture electrons. If that show doesn't run, all this other stuff that we're talking about, the fly ash business, the steam business, our data business, all those things do not actually happen. So the reliability of what Ethan has done at the plant and continues to do, and we are going to be running in the 90-some% capacity factor at all time. That is our goal. Our friends at Falkirk and North American Coal, we continue to drive to work together to innovate, and I'm so thankful for that partnership also. But I'll just add one thing when you mentioned, Todd, about Minnesota. When we basically decided to purchase the plant, and we have to go through all these regulatory permits, and the one that I underestimated the most was Minnesota. I could not believe, it seemed to me to be very, very unreasonable and delayed it, and almost very closely, basically, the deal was going to be off. And I look back at that and say, what would have changed in the last 2 years if Coal Creek wasn't running? Oh my gosh, the market? It's definitely, when we talk about load growth in the United States, we're talking about massive load growth. And so are they double counting some of this AI? Do we see there's an opportunity? I hope to think that everybody in this room looks at AI, looks at data, understands where it comes from, and say, can North Dakota lead? Can North Dakota lead in this? And my answer is yes. Can we do it in a responsible way? We have to do it in a responsible way. But I really think that the biggest opportunity that I see is to preserve these wonderful assets. And what Julie had mentioned from a lead earlier is the modernization of existing assets. That's the key. Because speed to market is everything. And if you're going to build anything in this world, it's really tough. Modernization of existing assets is a tremendous value, and that's what we're doing at Coal Creek Station.
Thank you. Mac, justifications for your pursuit, and where does that take you in the market?
Yeah, so, I mean, if you think about it, and I mean, you describe it as how are we engaged and what are the justifications for? I mean, one of the things that is a constant reminder, and that we're all trying to figure out what to do from a justification perspective. I shared we serve Minnesota, so we clearly have obligations to figure out how to have carbon free as it relates to meeting the obligations on that side of the river. One other that isn't a regulatory obligation, and Stacy talked a little bit about it, is we continue to see an increased ask from individuals that want carbon-free electricity delivered to them on a voluntary basis. And so as we try to fulfill the needs of the people who own us, frankly, and are asking for a product that is 24/7, 365 carbon-free, is to begin to look at it. But the thing not to forget, too, that we all are trying to figure out how to deal with, and Stacy described it, and I described it to my board recently, is I feel like in my job a drunken sailor who bounces off of the pier from one side to the other. From a political perspective, as I go down that pier, which is we're here today, and the next lawsuit we're here tomorrow, and the next policy change we're here, and back to that uncertainty. But the reality, if you want the hardest justification to deal with at the moment, is the law in the United States today, right, that exists today as it relates to CO2, put in place earlier this year, is that each of us will figure out fundamentally, short of the U.S. Supreme Court doing something, or we change the administration and they ultimately pull it back, by the year 2026, right? 2026 is not very far away. It's yesterday, and from a decision-making perspective, but we'll submit plans about how we're carbon-free in all the coal units in North Dakota unless we change the law today, right? So the existing law in the books today is to figure out how to do so. And so that by itself, Jason, just recognizing when I talk about a carbon-managed world, is justification to look at all of it. But I would be remiss if all I did is rely on saying we're doing it because it's a regulatory obligation. It's really the preservation of a multiple fuel source across the globe. Right? If we don't figure out how to do this today, we run the real risk that, at least in this country, we take a fuel source off the list forever. And so our plants aren't also going to last forever. And so, we talk a little bit about an initiative for the Lignite Energy Councils, what a Lignite Plan of the Future looks like. And that Lignite Plan of the Future at some point as well is going to have to be carbon-free if we're going to continue to live in the environment we have today as we look ahead. And so as I look at what we're doing in Tundra, which we've talked about, and it's shocking to me, we're on, I continue to say year 8. For those of you who know Stacy Dahl, she'll continue to remind me we're passing year 9 and moving towards year 10 on the project. And it's not because we can't get to a decision. It is, for those of you, if you do a recap in the history, Charlie and his staff and a bunch of people, the only operating plant we have right now generally operates in an environment that's 40 degrees above zero to 100 degrees above zero, right? Everybody in this room recognizes we have days when it gets to a minus 40 degrees, and so is it even possible? So we spent a couple of years with Charlie and his staff figuring out whether or not you could do this in the cold weather temps that we have. And then, as everybody in this room knows, we burn this coal, which is substantially and significantly different than any other coal in this country for the most part, other than our friends down in Texas to some extent. And so we spent a bit of time figuring out as well, can we do it on this coal type? And then how do you get the right set of framework, and how do you get policy to support it? And so all of those things take time. How do you get, a Class 6 permit? How do you get approved by EPA? All of those incremental steps require time, right? It is a recognition that, I sometimes wonder what have we been doing over the last 10 years, but it's to build a spot that you can ultimately have the framework which would allow you to do it, right? Now we got to continue to work through how do you manage the economics, right? And then one of the other challenges I think that everybody is looking at, so I sometimes ask why are not more people in the world looking at it. One is the economics are challenging, right? We're north of $2 billion on our project today, right? One of the challenges for me individually is my whole net balance sheet is $1.8 billion. So I'm building a project to remove CO2 off my largest unit that's larger than the entire size of my entire company, right? And so making sure you get the economics right and not screw that up is a big part of making it work. And Stacy and I were talking before we walked up here, and then getting the vendors to help you figure out how to do it cost effectively has its own set of challenges associated with kind of where do you go. But again, it goes back to my kind of opening comments. We are committed to figuring out whether or not we can do carbon capture on the Young Station through Project Tundra. It is partially because of what we face just right now from a regulatory environment. It is partially to preserve options to go forward. It is partially so that we have a chance globally to continue to produce carbon-free energy for the globe as we continue to live in a carbon-managed world, right? So all of those things become your justification. The question is whether you can do that cost-effectively. Sometimes being first is not always the greatest position to be in, but hopefully the lessons we've learned have translated into help for some of the stuff that I know Stacy has already worked on. And so there's a pioneering aspect of it that, again, I think everyone would be remiss to not recognize. We have the opportunity in North Dakota to do it. So justification today, Charlie, I think is twofold. If I were to just bring it back, is one is we may not be able to operate without it from a regulatory environment here pretty soon. And two is if we don't do something like this, we are continuing to potentially cut off sources of very valuable and very cost-effective energy around the world over time.
Thank you. And Todd, your picture is a little different because you have DGC in addition to power plants. So the justification that takes you down this road, what do you see?
So the opportunities that we continue to look at Basin are DGC, and we'll continue to probably partner with the state and the EERC to investigate whether that CO2 stream can be used in enhanced oil recovery within the state instead of shipping some of those extra tons up to Canada, and our Canadian contracts will roll off towards the end of the decade. So we'll continue to innovate there. And then I mentioned earlier the Wyoming, the Integrated Test Center at our Dry Fork Station in Wyoming, and we continue to invite partners to test their technology for the CO2 capture at Dry Fork. And then we'll have, in Wyoming, I mentioned what a great partner people in North Dakota and the state and other stakeholders throughout the state have been. Wyoming has been a very similar story. We've got a close relationship with the University of Wyoming there that runs and does the administration for the Integrated Test Center, and the governor's office and legislature have been very supportive as well. So we'll continue to let our partners test their technologies at the Integrated Test Center, and then we'll also look to build potentially a field similar to what we've developed at DGC with a number of wells for storing that CO2. So we've got a number of opportunities. I think one thing that, and probably a lot of people in the room know it, but one thing that has made this all possible economically is Section 45Q of the tax code was amended with the Inflation Reduction Act a number of years ago. And that's a really neat North Dakotan story as well. At Basin, one of our teammates, Dan Gallagher, had been looking at it, and the 45Q tax credit was much smaller before the Inflation Reduction Act was passed. And he partnered up with folks at DGC looking at opportunities to sequester the excess CO2 at DGC, and they looked at it from all angles, and the economics were pretty marginal. But Dan, through just dogged determination and maybe a little bit of craziness on his part, just kept at it. And he actually partnered with somebody in our government relations team, Tyler Hammond, who now works for Charlie. Thank you, Charlie. We can talk about that later. But Tyler, who worked for Basin at the time till about this time last year, Tyler had some well-placed contacts from his time in D.C. At Senator Manchin's staff. And so Manchin was kind of the vote for the Inflation Reduction Act. And Tyler, working in Manchin's office and with some, again, well-placed contacts throughout the North Dakota congressional delegation, was able really to connect those dots and get Manchin's office to move on a higher credit for 45Q and get support, really informed support, based on what we've been doing at DGC for almost a quarter century, to kind of inform Manchin's decision. And that got the enhancement to the 45Q economics got in really through North Dakota efforts again, and has made all of this possible. And it obviously is going to has benefited and is going to continue to benefit North Dakota handsomely, but there's some other states out there that are going to be able to benefit from it as well. So not only have we done something great for the state of North Dakota, but we've also done something great for our country here as well.
Thanks. And Charlie, the question's just a little bit different for you as a researcher at a research entity, because you could be doing CO2 research multiple places across the world. You could probably be doing other topics at EERC. So what is your motivation for working on this right here, right now, where you are?
Absolutely. Thanks, Jason. Just taking it back for a second, we live in the best country, the greatest country in the world. And that's built on a lot of things. It's built on a democracy, but what really built this country was cheap, reliable energy that fueled everything. It made us a global superpower. And now we sit here today, we've got to have clean, affordable, reliable energy. So it's a little different, but that is what the world is demanding. We have 8 billion people on planet Earth today. And about a quarter of those people, maybe half, are in energy poverty, whereas they cannot either afford the energy or they just plain and simple don't have it. And if you look around the world, there is an incredible diversity of resources. Some places have coal, some have oil and gas, some have renewable resources that are plentiful, materials to make things like that. We need to utilize every single one of our energy resources and do them as cleanly and affordably as we possibly can, because in the next 20, 30 years, we will have 2 billion more people. 2 billion. We have an opportunity in North Dakota to lead the world, and we are, because we have all of those resources right here. We have them at the table, we have the technology, we have Team North Dakota, the policy pieces in place to be able to take our resources, show the world how we can use coal, oil and gas, wind, renewables of all different types, nuclear potentially, all of these things together to solve that big challenge, to bring people's quality of life to where we are today. Not everybody enjoys this right now, and if we don't do anything, we start taking resources off the table, that next 2 billion people will not enjoy it as well. And that will lead to famine, death, war, none of these things that we want to see or tolerate. We already see this happening today. So we have this incredible responsibility in the United States, and I say in North Dakota, to lead the way, do carbon capture and storage, do all of these different things. If we're talking about carbon capture and on coal, not just storing it, because that's fantastic. We can have reliable, clean, baseload power, but then putting it to work, as Stacy said, into the Bakken. Today in North Dakota, it matters for every single one of us in this room that we produce 1.2 million barrels a day. As you mentioned, over half of the state's income today comes from production and extraction tax alone, not to mention sales tax, all that. It is going to start declining at some point. But we have, and I have to correct you a little bit, I think we're producing something like 2-3% of the Bakken resource, not 15-20%. If we continue on this just drill, produce, we're gonna leave 90+% of that oil in place. There is maybe 1 trillion barrels of oil there. If we put carbon capture and storage on all of our coal-fired power plants, put them to work, that could produce a couple 100,000 barrels of oil per day that we're otherwise not producing. And I point that out because that is a fraction of what we produce today. In other words, we are CO2 starved. And if we think that we're not going to use oil and gas for products, transportation fuels, I think we're mistaken. I think we're going to. And if we're going to use one, let's use one with the lowest carbon intensity that we possibly can. And that comes from utilizing CO2 that we capture and put it downhole, produce barrels of oil that we wouldn't otherwise, extending the life of that play, fueling our economy, providing cleaner, reliable, more affordable energy, and setting the stage for everybody else around the world to do that. That's why we do this. That's what we need to continue to do. And that's why I sit here working at the EERC trying to drive these technologies forward.
Thank you. We're going to do one more round of questions, and we'll open it up to see if there's any audience questions. And I'll start with Mac asking you a question that you alluded to earlier. What does the future look like in the industry? Where are we going?
Hopefully there have been signs of light, I would say, in the last 6 to 8 months from and this is more, I would call it in the utility space or the production of the electron as Stacy described it. We were headlong, I think, towards what I call that myopic vision. I think we were beginning to see, for lots of reasons, optimism that we'll begin to step back from that, and that in the reliability space, in the use of resources space, in the investigation of new technologies space. And if we're going to continue to rely on, I think, has been identified, a growing need for electricity for all kinds of things. Again, foremost right now on people's mind is what do we do as it relates to AI and data, and how do you allow that to continue to grow and develop, which creates all kinds of opportunities, right? I think about some of the challenges in North Dakota we have today around workforce, and I think about, we talk a lot about oil and gas and its contribution, but you'd be hard-pressed to not forget the second you drive out of town that a huge portion of the economy in North Dakota is driven on agriculture as well, and the capacity and ability to get people to help there, and the technologies around how can you go to more autonomous based? Well, autonomous based all runs on data, right? How do you get people talk about? I saw it this morning as people are trying to figure out how do you respond to the idea that you have 14,000 people striking on the East Coast right now related to longshoremen, and a dialogue around whether a portion of that work for both safety purposes and labor purposes replaced by robots. Now, that's not to say I'm beating up on the workforce aspect of it or to point that out. It's just that as people look to try to figure out, I'm more than willing to bet that a portion of the challenge that those guys are facing are long hours and lots of activities and a productivity set of characteristics that fundamentally require more labor. Right? And if we don't have that labor available to us, then how do we find alternatives? And all of those alternatives are driven by data, right? The capacity to print things differently than we've ever printed them before, from a graphics perspective, all driven by data. And by the way, they also need products called like graphite and graphene and a whole bunch of other things that Mike Holmes talks about as it relates to the opportunities for Lignite as well. So I think, Jason, the idea of where are we headed, I think we're we have a little bit of regained thought about we can't drive down the path we were headed. And I think we have lots of things that are on the horizon that are positive if we'll have the patience to allow them to develop, right? And they're all the things that Stacy described earlier and Charlie described earlier is the opportunities for the resources we have, the opportunities to use the resources we have differently. And so I think it's a really bright future. I was in a meeting at the end of last week trying to figure out, there's a group of individuals now who want to actually convert CO2 back into a fuel. So there's a process that you can take that gas that a lot of people are calling a waste stream today, and I think, Stacy, you're right, it's an opportunity, not a waste stream. And you reconvert that CO2 back into an additional fuel source as you move ahead. And so technologically, I think we have to have an open mind if we're going to continue to advance. And so as I look forward, I think we have a tremendous set of opportunities if we can continue to get people to slow down for just a minute and think about what the long haul is as it relates to Charlie's point about the greatest country in the world is because we were mindful of using technology and we allowed technology to help us and we had affordable and reliable electricity to do so. That opportunity is on steroids as you look at the next 2 decades. But we have to allow it to happen.
Thank you. Todd?
Well, I'll just kind of touch on what Charlie mentioned too, that if you think about there are 3 strategic advantages that really Providence has provided to the United States. It is 2 oceans that provide a buffer from foreign adversaries. It is 25,000 miles of navigable inland waterways that allow us to move commerce around. And then it's the geologic stuff that Charlie mentioned of having land to feed ourselves and then the geology to actually fuel ourselves. And what we've been going through in the carbon-constrained world that Mac was referencing earlier is we're almost throwing away a third of our providential strategic advantage as a country, which is just absolutely crazy. And if we can look across the Atlantic Ocean and seeing what's happening in Europe right now. There are fertilizer plants in Europe that sit idle because of natural gas prices. They're uneconomic to run. Again, Charlie mentioned that there are going to be 2 billion additional people. Well, without the fertilizer products that DGC proudly produces and that are produced by other synthesis of natural gas, you would have 50% less fertilizer in the world. The food supply would be 50% less. So the importance of carbon-based energy, like Stacy was talking about earlier, is just, it's paramount. It's connected with higher standards of living. So policy-wise, I think we need to be really, really careful. And I'm optimistic that the pendulum has swung as far to the other side as it possibly can. And if you think back over history, these things typically have about a 20-year life. And look back to the Arab oil embargo that started in the early 70s, and you had skyrocketing gas prices. And what happened? Well, it became U.S. policy to build coal facilities and to tap our coal resources. And then you saw coal facilities built pretty steadily up until the early to mid 90s, and then it really trickled off. And some of that was supply and demand, and some of it was just better gas production technology and being able to, with companies like GE and Mitsubishi, building better gas turbines and natural gas becoming more abundant because of the deregulation that we did in the late 70s, again, to address high prices of our fossil fuels. But then in the past 20 years, you've certainly had, during basically my entire career in the utility space, you've had much more carbon-constrained atmosphere to contend with. But if you look over the last 2 years, Standard & Poor's, which is a financial service company, they rate bonds and they have a number of other product lines in the financial services field, but they actually track the use of ESG, and that stands for environmental, social, and governance issues, on public companies' quarterly financial conference calls. And environmental, social, and governance is what some people think ESG stands for. I think it actually stands for energy stops growing, which we can't have, and we've all discussed. But as Standard & Poor's tracks it, it was probably early in 2022, you had peak ESG mentions on public company quarterly financial conference calls, and it's come down at about a 45-degree angle. So I think that's a reason for optimism, that people now understand, probably post what happened in Uri, where 250 people died in Texas as a result of power outage. People are understanding the importance of baseload, carbon-based generation. And I think Stacy touched on this earlier, but it's also a matter of national strategic interest. And do we want to be able to be the leaders in AI and manage our own data, or do we want China to do so, or other foreign adversaries? And I think we want ourselves to do that, and I think our policy makers on both sides of the aisle are realizing that. So that is a reason for optimism. Another reason for optimism, I think, is because there's a really interesting discussion going on between the environmental groups, the companies in Silicon Valley that manage most of our data, and the party that most of those entities support. And they're beginning to understand that you can't be leaders economically in AI, data, technology without dispatchable resources. So it's, things are a little bit grim now, especially with what the EPA did to us in the late spring. But I think you can see some sanity trickling back into the discussion, which should make for a bright future for all the leading resources here in North Dakota.
Thank you, Charlie.
So I'm wearing a coal lapel pin, and this word has been demonized. It's been this dirty four-letter word, when really it's a resource that if we put technology to work on it, it produces electrons, produce valuable carbon products, can produce rare earth elements and critical minerals. It's a valuable resource and commodity, and I think we need to continue to tell people that we can utilize coal in a good way. Just like every one of the other energy resources has its detractors, right? You can use coal in a poor way. You can use wind power in a poor way. For example, just throwing away the blades when you're done with them and burying them in a hole. That's not a very good environmental use. We can also try to recycle those. My point in this is that we have an opportunity to use this resource, which is found throughout the entire planet, utilize it in a good and effective way to produce reliable, affordable energy. And I think about the lignite plant or coal-fired plant of the future. It could be this place where we're taking the lignite out of the ground or coal out of the ground, doing beneficiation things beforehand, such as removing the rare earth elements and critical minerals from them, making that lignite into power, capturing the carbon dioxide, putting it to work in oil and gas fields to produce oil that we would otherwise not be able to produce, taking those resources, making fertilizer to feed the world. A whole host, all you have to do is go out to DGC to see that lignite coal can produce, well, I think you produce over a dozen and could produce more than that if you chose to. It has incredible properties and incredible value. When you stop demonizing that word, utilize that resource for what it is, and make the world a better place because of lignite, because of its valuable properties. And we have the ability to take away the detractors, whether it be SOx, NOx, particulates, mercury, and now carbon dioxide, and taking that, as Stacy said, from a waste stream and making it a commodity stream. I think that's what we need to do going forward. And if you have the opportunity, and I'm guessing you all do, share that message with your neighbor the next time you have a conversation, and try to meet them where they're at, to listen to their concerns, and then talk to them about the value and the potential upside of utilizing this and the downside of abandoning it.
Thank you, Stacy.
The question of what does the future look like, and the future is extremely bright. I am so excited about the future and the opportunity that we have. If you look at the United States, on a peak level, we're going through about 700 to 750,000 megawatts an hour. That's a peak. Do I see that going to 1 million? I do. And you better start running towards fossil fuels, as we will not be able to go ahead and maintain that growth. And so you're starting to have these RTO markets, you're starting to have FERC, you're starting to hear others on the other side say, wait a minute, reliability is pretty important, humanity is pretty important, fertilizer is pretty important. You're starting to get that. It's taken a little longer, but what excites me so much is the fact that we can lead. I think North Dakota can lead in all the above. But the United States, when Charlie's talking about our competitive advantage, anytime you're going into any market, you want to make sure that your niche identifies what is your competitive advantage, and our country was built on low energy costs, period. And we can continue to be the leader in the world in doing that. And so the rest of the world need these wonderful resources. Are we going to take on this opportunity? I think of one quick thing here is on technology. And if I told everybody in the room that through technology, we're going to extend the life of everybody in this room by 20 years, I think most people in the room would say that's really a good thing. But I'm still going to have some people in the room saying, how are we going to deal with Social Security? You're still going to have those people. So you have to have those conversations. Everything has consequences, and we got to look at what is best for humanity. And I can just tell you the correlation between fossil fuels and humanity, it's so clear, as they were talking about here on the stage. We need to continue to foster and bring low energy costs to the world. We're no strangers to doing that in the United States. We'll continue to lead. I just hope in North Dakota that we look at this and have those honest conversations with people and say, this is an opportunity, because I do believe the future of North Dakota, I'm wickedly excited about the future. Is will we basically move forward? Will we take advantage of what we have in front of us, or are we going to squander the opportunity? I know North Dakota is all about, we will make it happen. It's not going to be easy, not at all, and nothing is that's worth anything. But I'm really excited about what we have going in the state. Obviously at Coal Creek Station, every day is a fun day.
Thank you. I'm going to make my way up to the lectern to just give me a better chance to see if there's any questions. And while I do that, I would say that one could argue that this